What if everything you've been taught about the Slavs was wrong? Before kingdoms, before empires, their story was already written, not in books but in blood. Beneath the forests of Eastern Europe, ancient bones are whispering a truth older than history itself. DNA has spoken, and its message shatters centuries of myth. Who were the first Slavs? Where did they really come from? The answers are hidden in the genes of warriors, farmers, and forgotten tribes. And what science has just uncovered will change everything we thought we knew. What if everything we thought we knew about the Slavs, their origins, migrations, and identity was wrong? What if buried deep beneath the forests, rivers, and plains of Eastern Europe lies a genetic story far older and more complex than history ever recorded? For centuries, the Slavic peoples have been defined by language, culture, and myth. But now, ancient DNA is revealing something extraordinary. The Slavs were not born overnight from a single tribe or region. They were the descendants of ancient Europeans whose roots stretch back thousands of years. Long before the name Slav was ever spoken, picture the early landscapes of Eastern Europe after the Ice Age. Vast forests, endless rivers, and scattered human settlements. Long before kingdoms rose, long before Christianity and empires, there lived tribes who hunted, farmed, and built the first wooden fortresses on these lands. Archaeologists once struggled to connect these early peoples with the Slavs of history, but DNA has begun to bridge that gap. Ancient genomes from Poland, Ukraine, the Balkans, and Russia have now been sequenced, and the results have shocked even the experts. These genetic profiles tell us that the Slavs emerged not as outsiders invading Europe, but as descendants of the very people who had lived there for millennia. Ancient DNA from Bronze and Iron Age sites shows continuity with later Slavic populations. The Slavic genetic signature contains strong elements of ancient Central and Eastern European hunter-gatherers, early Neolithic farmers from the Balkans, and a powerful wave of Indo-European steppe herders known as the Yamnaya, horsemen, who swept into Europe around 3000 BC and reshaped the continent's genetic map. The combination of these three ancestral layers, hunter-gatherer, farmer, and steppe warrior, created the genetic foundation of what would later become the Slavic peoples. And when linguists and geneticists compared this DNA with that of modern populations, they found an unmistakable pattern. From Poland to Serbia, from Ukraine to Czechia, from Croatia to Russia, there is a shared ancestral signature distinct from Western Europeans or Scandinavians. The DNA proves that the Slavs are not latecomers to Europe. They are among its oldest continuous inhabitants. Before we journey deeper into these revelations, remember, this is not speculation or legend. Every fact here comes from genetic studies published by real scientific teams, the Reich Laboratory at Harvard, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of Warsaw. This is the story of how science rewrote the origins of an entire people. And if you love learning how DNA reshapes history, make sure to subscribe to GenealogyX, where the hidden stories of ancestry and identity come alive through true science. So where did the Slavs actually come from? Ancient DNA suggests their heartland was not a single birthplace, but a vast cradle stretching from the Vistula River in Poland to the Dnieper in Ukraine. Between 1500 BC and 500 AD, this region saw the rise and fall of many cultures, the Triciniac, Lusatian, and Zarubintsy cultures, all leaving traces of the same genetic heritage that later appears in early medieval Slavic burials. These were not isolated tribes. They were part of an ancient network connected by trade, migration, and shared ancestry. When Roman chroniclers first mentioned the Sclaveni and Antes in the 6th century, they were already describing a people who had lived in Eastern Europe for generations. The surprise is that these new tribes were genetically the same as the Bronze Age populations of the region. The Slavs didn't appear suddenly. They evolved gradually out of prehistoric societies, carrying with them the deep memory of Europe's ancient past. But DNA reveals something even more intriguing. As Slavic-speaking peoples expanded during the early Middle Ages, south into the Balkans, west into Central Europe, and north toward the Baltic, they mixed with neighboring groups. Their genes absorbed elements of the Germanic, Baltic, and Thracian peoples they encountered, yet the core Slavic ancestry remained remarkably stable. This stability shows that the early Slavs carried a strong genetic identity that persisted even as they spread across half a continent. The Y chromosome data, which traces paternal lines, tells its own story. The most common male lineage among Slavs, known as R1a M458, has been found in ancient remains from Poland and western Ukraine, dating back more than 3,000 years. This proves that the paternal roots of the Slavs were already established in the same lands long before written history. Meanwhile, mitochondrial DNA, passed through mothers, shows a similarly deep continuity, suggesting families, not just warriors, were part of these migrations. One of the most unexpected findings comes from comparing ancient Slavic DNA with that of modern Europeans. It turns out that many Western and Southern Europeans share fragments of early Slavic ancestry, particularly in regions that once experienced Slavic settlement or migration. The genetic footprint of the Slavs stretches far beyond the modern borders of Slavic nations. Even in Germany and Austria, small but detectable traces of early Slavic DNA remain. The Slavs, once seen as late arrivals, were in fact among the great ancestral weavers of Europe's genetic tapestry. Think about this. For centuries, historians argued over whether the Slavs migrated en masse from the north, or suddenly appeared from nowhere around the 6th century. But DNA has silenced that debate. The evidence shows continuity, not invasion. The Slavs didn't suddenly arrive in Europe, they were already there. Their identity forming over thousands of years as cultures evolved and languages shifted. What would it mean if your own DNA could trace back to those same early farmers, warriors, and tribes? Would you feel different knowing that your bloodline has survived ice ages, migrations, and empires? Science reminds us that history isn't just written in books, it's encoded in us. One of the most powerful discoveries came from comparing Slavic genomes with those of ancient steppe peoples. Genetic links connect the slaves directly to the Yamnaya and corded ware cultures, the very groups responsible for spreading Indo-European languages across Europe. This means that the ancestors of the Slavs were among the first to carry the seeds of the Indo-European tongue that would one day evolve into Slavic languages. Language and DNA walk hand in hand through time, carrying echoes of the past into the present. But just as we begin to think the puzzle is solved, new mysteries emerge. In some Slavic regions, particularly in the Balkans, genetic samples show traces of ancient Balkan and even Anatolian ancestry, lineages older than the Slavs themselves. Could it be that early Slavic migrations absorbed remnants of forgotten civilizations? Could buried within modern Slavs be the last echoes of prehistoric peoples who once ruled the Danube and the Carpathians? Ancient DNA is beginning to answer that too. In Serbia and Bulgaria, remains from the Iron Age show surprising continuity with modern populations. It means the arrival of the Slavic language and culture did not erase what came before. It merged with it. The people didn't vanish. They transformed. Across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found ancient burial sites where genetic signatures blend northern steppe ancestry with southern Balkan DNA. This mixing gave rise to the diverse but interconnected Slavic world we know today, a civilization born not from conquest, but from connection. Even more fascinating, the genetic link between Eastern and Western Slavs remains strong despite centuries of political division. Whether in Poland or Russia, Croatia or Slovakia, the ancient genetic signal endures. The Slavs share a deep ancestral unity, one older than kingdoms or borders, and yet the story doesn't end here. Scientists are now analyzing DNA from even older human remains in Eastern Europe, stretching back 10,000 years to trace the full prehistoric roots of the Slavic genome. The results hint that the ancestors of the Slavs were among the very first Europeans to return to the continent after the last ice age, settling in the same river valleys that would later become the heartlands of Slavic civilization. So, who are the Slavs, really? They are not a mystery tribe that appeared out of nowhere. They are the living descendants of Europe's most ancient peoples. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and continuity. The language, the culture, the shared identity, all of it rests on a genetic foundation that has endured through every empire and invasion. If this journey into the real origins of the Slavs has made you see history differently, remember to subscribe to GenealogyX, where DNA turns myth into evidence, and Ancestry becomes adventure. As we look at the vast forests and rivers of Eastern Europe today, one question remains: if DNA can reveal the ancient truth of the Slavs, what other forgotten peoples are still waiting to speak through their bones? Maybe the next great revelation lies not in a book or a tomb, but in the blood that flows quietly within us all, the oldest storyteller of them all.